We see in our last talk, we spoke about the promises that God had made to Abraham. Firstly, that the land, north, south, east and west, would be given to him and to his seed as an everlasting possession. We also saw, to confirm that promise that God had made, God was able to make a covenant with Abraham in which he by a covenant contract, was able to confirm that the promises that he had made would surely come to pass. And this involved, at that point of time, the fact that he would have a child. Now, from the first time that Abraham came out of Ur of the Chaldees to the birth of his son Isaac was something like 25 years. So Abraham had to endure that time period, believing that what God had promised to him, God would be able to perform. We find that later on in the book of Genesis, we find the story of Abraham and Isaac. On this occasion, God says to Abraham to take thy son and to take him up to a mountain and there to offer Isaac as a sacrifice to God. Now the record tells us that Abraham did this, and he went to a place called Mount Moriah. Now, for those of you who don't know where Mount Moriah is, it's one of the little hills around the city of Jerusalem. So he takes Abraham, his son, up to this particular place. He builds an altar. He lays Isaac down as an offering, binds him upon the altar. He takes a knife, and he's about to slay his son in conformity with the promises, with the request that God had made to him, and that angel of the Lord stays his hand and says, don't kill the boy. He then makes a statement to Abraham to the effect that because you have obeyed my voice, God says he swore with an oath. And then he details certain other promises made to Abraham. He swore with an oath that his seed would possess the gates of his enemies, and that in him and his seed all families of the earth would be blessed. Now that's an amazing promise that God had made. The terminology which is used there, thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemies, is a terminology in those days. Of course, the person who controlled the gates of the city could let people in and let people out. They controlled who went in and went out. So controlling the gates of your enemies means that you have rulership over them. Now it's interesting that on this occasion, God swears with an oath. Now it's mentioned in the New Testament when commenting about this particular point. He says that God, willing to show unto Abraham how strong his promises were, confirmed the promise with an oath. And that's the reference to Genesis chapter 23. That by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation. Now notice the point that he makes. Two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie. So we have here three separate occasions when God speaks to Abraham regarding his possession of the land. Firstly, can we trust God's promise? So God promised to Abraham all the land that he could see for an everlasting possession. He then gives a covenant, which is a binding agreement between God and Abraham to fulfill that promise. Thirdly, he confirms all those things by swearing an oath by himself. So that by three things, God has made promises to Abraham. And the question is, does God lie or not? Is that promise, that covenant, and that oath so immutable that it cannot be broken, and that at some future stage in the history of the world, those promises will be fulfilled? That is, that Abraham will inherit the land of Israel forever. And, secondly, that his seed will inherit the land forever. Now the strange thing here, or not strange, but Abraham dies. He doesn't get anything. His son Isaac is visited by God. And God says to Isaac, you know the promises I made to your father? Well, I'm making the same promise to you if you will obey my voice. Isaac eventually dies. God speaks to Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, and he makes exactly the same promise to Jacob. Now, Jacob and Isaac must have been fully understood the situation that Abraham died and got nothing, Isaac died and got nothing, and finally Jacob died, and he died in Egypt and he got nothing. So how were these promises ever going to be fulfilled if all of the promises that had been given to them were left unfulfilled? In the next series we'll deal with that.